So this is going to be the lab scenario that we are going to have after installing our domain controller. So after installing our domain controller and it is now up and running, so the next task that we have is to install Exchange Server 2016. But before that, we need to install Server 2012 R2 with below hardware and system settings. So what we are doing in here is we already set up a domain controller for MGO Tech Company for their Sacramento office. Now what they're asking us, okay, you set up our domain controller already and now you have to install and configure Exchange Server 2016, and we want you to use these hardware and system settings, and they want us to use 4 GB of RAM, 100 GB of storage, and server name should be Sacramento EJO EXC01 Exchange 01. And IP address is 10.10.254.60 and mask of 255.255.255.0. So this is going to be our lab to install Exchange Server 2016, and let's get it started. Alright, so now our Sacramento domain controller is set up. So same thing is going to be applied with our Exchange Server 2. In order to create a new virtual machine, click here, create a new virtual machine. We will select typical. Press next. Our ISO is already detected and we do not have any CD in our disk drive, physical disk drive, and we do not want our operating system to be installed later, so we will just use that. Press next because I don't have any information about license right now, so I'll just select this so that we are gonna use the trial version. What do you want to name this virtual machine? I want to name this virtual machine same as our lab, so it's gonna be SAC EJO EXC01. And again, I'm not going to store my virtual machine into my C drive. I'm going to use D drive, and then I'll just create a new folder where I'll just name it SAC EJO EXC01 and press OK. Next. So based on our lab, it should be 100 GB. Next, power on the virtual machine after creation, and I'll just power it on. After powering it up, the same process is going to be applied here that we did in our domain controller installation for our operating system, and it is now going to load the operating system, and it will start copying the files, and then once the installation is done, we will be able to access the operating system. So it will just restart once and that's all. Setup is starting now and it's going to take a while, so I'm going to pause the video so that it's not going to take our time recording. The copying Windows file, so installing Windows is here now, and you can see that it is copying, getting ready, and installing features, installing updates, and then once it is done with all these process, the server will restart, and then we will have the full version of operating system in front of us. And again, it's not going to ask us for any username and password because it's going to use the local username and password of physical machine. That's how the VMware workstation works. But when you install a server operating system in a physical machine, or you use a virtualization software like VMware, vSphere, they are the virtualization applications for enterprise businesses. and medium-sized businesses, what they will do is, like, what that application will do is, it will always behave like you are installing an operating system into a physical machine. So but this VMware workstation is not going to ask us for any username and password to set up. We will have to set up that manually, as you saw in our video for domain controller. So after completing that, you saw that the window where it is restarting now, and this is the first time loading of operating system after the installation, and let's see how it looks like. Getting ready, and 1, 2, 3. It worked. So let's wait for it then. It is black screen right now, but I'm sure that it is loading. So it just restarted again after getting ready. So it will take a little bit of time to load the operating system, and let us log into this server. Alright, so it is installing VMware tools, and as I told you, it did not ask for any username and password. Servers always ask for username and password. So as you can see that it is logged in as PLM Joe, and my computer is also Pervez Joe. So what are we going to do now? So after installing the Exchange server, you always need to make sure again that the naming convention is correct. You have a naming convention for your Exchange server, because if you are using this naming convention, then this is not going to work for your company or for organizations, because they never want to use a naming convention like that. They always want to have a naming convention based on their requirements and needs. So it's going to be SAC HO Exchange 01. Oh, it's restarting because I think it was installing the VMware tools, so that's why it just restarted. So we will just wait for it so that it's gonna restart, and then we will just rename our operating system. Alright, so we are in again, and I'll just right click on this PC, properties, advanced system settings, computer name, change, and then it is going to be all capital letters, SAC EHO, Exchange 01, press OK. Okay, close, restart later, because I'm going to complete the lab. And as you can see that it is network address translation, NAT again. So what we are gonna do is we will do the same process that we did with our domain controller. We will just make it host only first, and after making it host only, I'll just go to network sharing center, change adapter settings, and then right click properties, and then TCP/IP version 4, and based on our lab it should be 10.10.254.60, 255.255.255.0, and the domain controller is going to be 53, if you remember. So okay, after adding IP address and all those things, the next thing that I'll do is I'll just go to CMD, and then okay, and I'll type hostname is same because I didn't restart it. I'll have to restart my PC in order to just make sure that the naming convention is going to be applied. So ping 10.10.53. Okay, ping transit general failure, so it's not pinging the domain controller. I'll do nslookup. As you can see that the nslookup is working fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to restart this operating system so that it is going to simply change the name to Sakijo ESX01. So all changes are going to take effect, and we should be able to ping our domain controller. And one of the other things that I want to show you is when you right click on the virtual machine and you go to power, you can simply say restart guest. It is going to restart your server or operating system. So you can restart, shut down, power off from this VMware workstation uh, application too. Alright, so it is starting now, and it should not take that much time. And if we go again and type cmd and do hostname, hooray! So it is now SAC EJO Exchange 01, which means that the changes took effect. So before installing your Exchange server, step number 1, make sure you have a proper naming convention. Step number 2, make sure that the nslookup is working, which means that the name resolution is working. If you see that you do nslookup and it says unknown and then the IP address, that means that it is not resolving with DNS server, like it is not resolving its name to the DNS server. Then what you can do is you can verify using ping 10.10.254.53, which is your domain controller. And if you were able to ping it and still you see unknown in here, then you need to make sure that you have reverse lookup zone created in your DNS server, and you will have to check your DNS server to do the other troubleshootings. So step number 1 is to make sure that you have a proper naming convention. Step number 2 is make sure that you have nslookup working, and if nslookup is working, it means that the ping will also work. So ping is just, you're using ping to check the connectivity to your domain controller. Step number 3 is make sure that your PC is joined to the domain. So we will join this PC to the domain, and then we will end our video here, and we will go ahead and do the installation of our Exchange server in our next video. So the domain name is elmjoe.tech.local. Alright, so now it's asking me for username and password of domain controller. Like, you can type any authorized username and password that you have in your Active Directory. So any authorized username and password that you have in Active Directory will be able to join a computer server or any system to the domain. So I'll have to restart this because if you don't restart, the changes will not take effect. So once you restart your operating system, it will be joined to the domain, and you will be able to log in to this operating system using your Active Directory credentials. So if I go to my Active Directory server just to show you something, if I go to my Active Directory server, I go to admin tools, and then I go to Active Directory users and computers, and then I go to computers. You see SAC EJO Exchange 01, which means that it is now joined. And when you click on properties, you can see the DNS name, you can see the operating system, and all those information about this Exchange server. So if I do Control Alt Insert now, you can see that it is asking me for username and password, which it was not asking before we joined it to the domain. So I'll just type administrator. I'll just type elmgeotech.local, and then administrator, which is the username or account for our domain controller, and we're good to go. So we are now logged into our Exchange server using our domain credentials, which means that we are now ready to install our Exchange server. So again, we will have to finish some other requirements that we have. So we are already good with our hardware requirements, but with our software requirements, we will have to make sure that things like IIS, .NET framework is installed. So I'll just end the video in here because we have installed the OS and it is joined, the naming convention, and IP address is assigned. So the rest of these system requirements and prerequisites, we will just do that in our next video. So I hope you have learned something, and don't forget to build your own lab at home.